It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I received the letter that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. At first glance, it seemed like just another piece of mail from my uncle. But as I tore it open, the words on the page immediately caught my attention. "You're not inheriting anything. I've changed the will." I sat frozen, staring at the harsh, cold words in disbelief. My heart pounded as I reread the sentence, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. This couldn't be real. I had always been close to my uncle. In fact, for as long as I could remember, he had promised me that I'd inherit a portion of his estate when the time came. It wasn't just about the money, it was about his trust in me, his family. But now, with this letter in my hands, it felt like the rug had been ripped out from under me. I wasn't sure what was worse, the shock of the message or the utter betrayal I felt. I had no idea what had changed. What happened to the man who had been like a second father to me, someone I had looked up to and trusted completely? I read the letter once more, hoping to find some explanation, some reason behind the words that could make sense of this. But it was nothing but an ultimatum. No explanation. No comfort. Just a cold, final decision that I was being cut out. The pain of it settled in slowly, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to call him, to ask him why, but I was paralyzed by the uncertainty of what to say and the fear of hearing an answer that I wasn't prepared for. What had happened to us? Why did he feel the need to do this? The letter had left me with nothing but questions and a deep sense of loss that I wasn't sure how to cope with. As I sat there, holding the letter, my mind wandered back to all the memories I had of my uncle and our family. It wasn't just the inheritance that bothered me. It was the sudden shift in our relationship, the sense of distance that had crept in over the years. I couldn't help but replay moments in my head that now seemed tainted by this unexpected letter. I remembered when I was younger, how close we were. My uncle was always the one I turned to for advice, the one who would listen without judgment. I used to love spending weekends at his house, sitting by the fireplace, talking about everything and nothing at all. He was like a father figure to me, and I had always assumed that bond was unbreakable. He wasn't just a wealthy, successful man in my eyes. He was my mentor, my guide, my rock. But as I grew older, things began to change. Life, of course, had a way of doing that. I started to notice that my uncle became more distant, more consumed by his business, and less available. The calls between us became fewer, the visits more spaced out. At family gatherings, he seemed to retreat into the background, lost in his own world. I didn't understand it at the time, but now, with the sting of this letter fresh in my mind, I could see how much things had shifted without me even realizing it. There were subtle moments like the time I asked him for a little financial help during a rough patch, and he turned me down without a second thought. I had brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just bad timing. But now, in the light of this letter, I wondered if he had been pulling away long before I had noticed. I had always been the one he'd entrusted with the family business talks, the one he'd said would eventually take over. But now, I was left wondering if that was just a lie. The distance had never been so glaring until this letter arrived. In the span of one moment, everything had shifted. How had I gone from being his chosen successor to someone completely erased from his plans? Was it a slow process? Or had something happened more recently to bring us to this point? I searched for answers in the memories, but it was like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. I needed to understand what had changed, what had caused this rupture in our relationship. But the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, the letter still in my hands, I couldn't help but feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. Why would my uncle do this? Why now? After all these years of family ties, shared memories, and expectations. His decision to change the will wasn't just a legal matter, it was personal, and it cut deeper than I could have imagined. I thought back to our last conversation, the one that had seemed so ordinary at the time. We had spoken briefly about his health, his ongoing projects, and his plans for the future. He had been distant but cordial. Nothing about that conversation had suggested that anything was wrong, nothing that would hint at this sudden decision to disinherit me. Was there something I had missed? Something that had happened in the time since that I wasn't aware of? I couldn't help but wonder if this was some form of punishment. My mind raced through the events of the past few years. Had I done something to upset him? Had I said something during one of our rare visits that had angered him? I racked my brain for any clue, but nothing concrete came to mind. We had our differences, like all families do, but nothing that seemed to warrant this kind of drastic action. It felt like a betrayal, but it also felt like a slap in the face, a cold, calculated decision that I couldn't comprehend. It made me question his intentions. Was this really about the inheritance, or was there something deeper at play? My uncle had always been a man of principle, but he had also been incredibly shrewd in his dealings. Perhaps this wasn't about me at all. Perhaps this was his way of sending a message, of asserting control over something he felt was slipping away from him. Maybe in his mind. This was a way to take back power he felt he had lost. Or was it simply about the money, a final twist in a life that had been dominated by his wealth and success? And yet, the more I thought about it, the more the question gnawed at me if he truly felt betrayed or hurt by me. Why didn't he just tell me? Why hide behind a letter, a legal document, a cold, impersonal gesture? It wasn't like him. It wasn't like the man I had once known, the man who had always been upfront, who had always valued family above all else. Was this really the end of our relationship? Or was there something else I wasn't seeing yet? Days passed, but the confusion and bitterness from the letter lingered in my mind. Every time I tried to focus on anything else, my thoughts would circle back to the will. I couldn't help but feel like there was something I was missing, something bigger than just a simple change of inheritance. I needed answers. And I couldn't move forward until I understood why my uncle had made such a drastic decision. I decided to reach out to his lawyer, the one who had handled the family's legal matters for years. It wasn't easy to make the call, especially since the lawyer had been the one to deliver the devastating news to me. But I needed to know the truth. There had to be more to this than what was written in the letter. Maybe it wasn't entirely my uncle's decision. Maybe there was something else involved. When I finally got in touch, the lawyer's voice was as neutral as ever, but I could tell there was something weighing on him. After a few moments of small talk, I asked directly about the will. What exactly did my uncle change? Why wasn't I included? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a split second, I thought the lawyer might hang up. But then, he spoke softly, almost reluctantly. Your uncle. He didn't just change the will. He rewrote it completely. My heart skipped a beat. Rewrote it completely, but why I don't understand. We've always been a family. Why would he cut me out like this? The lawyer sighed. It's complicated. And I'm afraid it's not something I can fully explain without his direct involvement. But there were circumstances that you might not be aware of. Your uncle had a lot of regrets in his final years. He felt burdened by some of his past decisions. Some of the changes in the will were meant to reflect his desire to right certain wrongs, and others were his attempt to protect the people he felt needed it most. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What was he talking about? What do you mean? Protect? I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. My uncle had always been a proud man, one who valued independence above all else. Was this about his health, his finances, or something more personal? The lawyer's tone softened, but there was still a guardedness to it. Your uncle's relationship with you, it's not as straightforward as you think. He had his reasons, but there are things I'm afraid I can't discuss. Just know that everything in that will was intentional, and it wasn't just about money. There were things he had to do, decisions he had to make for his own peace of mind. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. What had he meant by decisions he had to make for his own peace of mind? The more I thought about it, the more questions flooded my mind. What had my uncle been going through in his final years that led him to change the entire will, and why was I left out of it entirely? I needed answers. And now, more than ever, I knew I would have to uncover the truth behind it all. After the conversation with the lawyer, I felt like a storm was brewing inside me. There were too many unanswered questions, too many layers to this story that I couldn't ignore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't live in this cloud of uncertainty. If I wanted to get to the heart of the matter, I had to confront my uncle directly. I had to hear it from him. But how do you approach someone who has cut you out of their will and left you with nothing but confusion and hurt? My uncle had always been a private man, someone who kept his emotions close to the chest. Even when I was younger, he was never one to share much of his personal life, preferring to stay in the background of family gatherings. Still, he was my family, and I wasn't going to let this lie without answers. I called his house the following day, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number. The phone rang several times before he picked up, his voice as calm and collected as ever. "Hello, Uncle Peter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me. We need to talk." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. I could sense his hesitation, and for a moment, I thought he might avoid the conversation altogether. But then he spoke. "I know why you're calling." I took a deep breath. "I need to understand why you did it. Why did you change the will? Why did you leave me out? You've always been there for me. And now, I feel like a stranger to you." He sighed, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. "You're not a stranger to me, but things have changed. I didn't make this decision lightly." I wasn't going to let him off easy. What changed? Uncle Peter, what happened that made you think this was the right thing to do? You've always been a father figure to me. And now, I'm left with nothing. There was another pause, and this time, when he spoke, his words came with an edge of frustration. "It's not about money." Okay, it never was. There were things I had to sort through, things I had to let go of. The family dynamics, the expectations, I couldn't carry that weight anymore. I made decisions for my own peace of mind. I was stunned. So, that's it. You made a decision to protect yourself, and you didn't even think about how it would affect me. You didn't think about me at all. Uncle Peter's voice softened. "It's complicated. There are things I can't explain to you right now. But trust me when I say this, I did it for the right reasons. And one day, you'll understand why." I could feel the distance growing between us with every word he said. "You think I'll understand? You think I'll just accept this?" I deserve more than just, "One day you'll understand." Uncle, I need answers now. There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. But some things, they're not always as simple as you think." The call ended shortly after, leaving me with more questions than answers. My heart was heavy with disappointment. It was clear that my uncle wasn't going to give me the closure I needed, and the answers I sought might never come. But one thing was for sure, this wasn't over. I wasn't going to let this be the final chapter of our story. I had to keep searching for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the days passed after my conversation with Uncle Peter, the weight of his words lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. I tried to push forward with my life, pretending that everything was fine. But the reality was that I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The letter, the change in the will, his coldness, everything felt like a betrayal I couldn't shake off. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about trust, family, and the bonds that had been shattered overnight. I found myself waking up each morning with a tight knot in my stomach. It was hard to focus on anything else, whether it was work, relationships, or just going through the motions of daily life. It was as if something deep inside me had broken, and no matter how hard I tried to glue the pieces back together, the cracks were still visible. The hardest part was the way it affected my sense of self-worth. Growing up, I always looked up to my uncle. He was a pillar in my life, someone I could turn to for advice, guidance, and support. But now, with one stroke of his pen, he had effectively told me I wasn't worthy of his legacy. I had always believed that family came first, that love and loyalty were the foundations of everything. But now, I questioned everything I had once held true. I began to wonder if I had somehow failed him, if there had been something I had done wrong without realizing it. Maybe there had been moments when I hadn't been there when he needed me, or perhaps I had taken him for granted. I replayed every interaction we'd ever had, searching for clues, for something that would explain the sudden shift in his attitude. But no matter how many times I went over it, I couldn't find an answer. I had always been there for him, just as he had been there for me. So why did he feel the need to make me feel so small? The emotional toll of it all started to seep into my personal life as well. I found myself withdrawing from friends, shutting down whenever the topic of family came up. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to admit how much it hurt. I hated the way people would look at me with pity, as if they could somehow understand the pain I was feeling. But they couldn't. No one could. This wasn't just about money or material things. It was about a deep, personal betrayal that cut to the core of who I was. I also began to question my future. How could I move forward when the foundation of my family had been shaken so violently if Uncle Peter, the person I had trusted the most, could do something like this? What did that say about the rest of my family? Were they all capable of such betrayal? Or had I simply placed my faith in the wrong person? It felt like the world I had known was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. The more I reflected, the more I realized that this situation wasn't just about inheritance. It was about the painful process of learning that people, even those we love, are imperfect. I didn't have the answers I wanted, but perhaps this was a moment of growth, a moment where I had to confront the uncomfortable truth that life doesn't always go the way we expect. Still, the journey to understanding was going to take time, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it yet. But one thing was for certain, my world had irrevocably changed, and I had to figure out how to move forward, no matter how uncertain the path ahead seemed. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, a twist came that I never could have predicted. It started one afternoon when I received a phone call from a lawyer I had never heard of. The voice on the other end was calm but firm, introducing himself as representing my uncle, Peter. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of anxiety and curiosity flooding my mind. I braced myself for more bad news, but what I heard next completely turned everything upside down. The lawyer informed me that Uncle Peter had, in fact, made another change to the will, one that reversed the decision he had made previously. He decided to reinstate me as a beneficiary. I felt as if the ground beneath me had been pulled away. At first, it didn't even register. The words seemed too surreal, like something out of a bad soap opera. Why, what changed? I asked, my voice shaky as I tried to process what I was hearing. The lawyer explained that Uncle Peter had undergone a sudden health scare, nothing life-threatening, but enough to shake him up and cause him to reconsider his decisions. He realized that the changes he'd made to the will had been done out of frustration, anger, and a sense of betrayal. According to the lawyer, Uncle Peter admitted that his feelings of resentment had clouded his judgment, and he was now seeking to make amends. The changes were made because he wanted to teach me a lesson, but the lesson, as he now understood, was misguided. I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me, but it was also mixed with disbelief. How could my uncle have been so cruel, only to turn around and do this? The sudden shift in his decision left me feeling more confused than ever. Had he really changed his mind for the right reasons? Or was this just another manipulation, another test to see how far he could push me before I snapped? Despite my reservations, I couldn't deny that this unexpected turn of events presented an opportunity. The inheritance wasn't something I'd been focused on anymore, not after everything that had happened, but the thought of having my relationship with my uncle restored, even partially, stirred something in me. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. Maybe it was his way of apologizing, his way of acknowledging the hurt he had caused. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, something I hadn't yet uncovered. As I hung up the phone, my mind raced with questions. How genuine was this new change, and what did it mean for my future with my uncle and the rest of the family for the first time in a long while? I found myself caught between hope and skepticism, unsure of where this new development would take me. But one thing was clear, the story wasn't over yet. The unexpected twist had only just begun, and I needed to prepare myself for whatever came next. After everything that had happened, it felt almost surreal to consider rebuilding my relationship with Uncle Peter. I had spent so many months wrestling with anger and confusion, trying to make sense of his decisions. And here I was, being offered the chance to start over. But the question lingered. Could I truly forgive him for the hurt he'd caused? Or was this simply another manipulation disguised as reconciliation? I took my time before agreeing to meet him. I needed to understand my own feelings, to reflect on what I had been through, and what I truly wanted moving forward. I realized that while I'd been hurt, the bitterness had started to consume me. Holding on to that anger wasn't bringing me peace. It was only keeping me stuck in a place of resentment. Perhaps rebuilding this relationship wasn't about erasing the past, but learning how to move forward in a healthier, more honest way. When the day of our meeting finally arrived, I walked into his office with a mix of trepidation and curiosity. Uncle Peter sat at his desk, looking smaller than I remembered, less the powerful figure I had once viewed him as, and more like a man who had been weighed down by his own decisions. He didn't immediately speak, but when he did, his voice was quieter, softer than it had ever been. "I owe you an apology," he began, and for the first time in a long time, I saw vulnerability in his eyes. "I was wrong to shut you out, to let my anger control me. I've hurt you more than I realized, and I want to make things right." It wasn't easy to hear, but it was something I needed to hear. Over the course of the conversation, I found myself beginning to see him in a different light. It wasn't about forgetting what he'd done, but understanding that people are complicated. Maybe he had made mistakes, but perhaps there was a chance for both of us to learn from this. We spoke about the past, about the way our family dynamics had shifted, about the disappointment and misunderstanding that had clouded our relationship. We also spoke about the future and what it might look like if we tried to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Slowly, cautiously, the walls between us started to come down. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As I left his office that day, I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation I had imagined, but it was something real, a step towards healing. It wasn't about the inheritance anymore. It was about moving forward in a way that would allow us both to grow and evolve. It wasn't going to be an easy road, but for the first time, I felt that there was a possibility for a new beginning. And that was enough for me to start believing again in the potential of our relationship. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I realize how much this journey has taught me. It wasn't just about the will or the inheritance. It was about understanding the complexities of family, the weight of our choices, and the importance of forgiveness. In the end, what mattered most was not the material things that were at stake, but the relationships that had been strained and the personal growth that came from facing uncomfortable truths. Uncle Peter's letter initially struck me as an irrevocable blow, one that seemed to close the door on any chance of reconciliation. It forced me to confront feelings of abandonment, betrayal, and loss that I had buried for years. But through that pain, I began to see something else emerge, a possibility for healing. By confronting the situation head on, by taking the time to understand his motives, and by being open to a conversation I had never imagined, I found a way to start healing not just my relationship with him, but with myself as well. Moving forward, I know that things won't be perfect. There will still be moments of tension, times when old wounds resurface, and perhaps even disagreements about the family legacy. But I also know that true peace isn't found in avoiding discomfort. It's found in embracing it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward with clarity and understanding. In many ways, this experience has reshaped my perspective on family, inheritance, and what truly matters. It's not the money or the possessions that define us, but the love, respect, and connections we nurture along the way. And sometimes, those things require us to dig deeper, to be vulnerable, and to let go of the past in order to create something better for the future. I don't know what lies ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I feel a sense of peace. I've learned that reconciliation takes time, that it requires patience, and that the real inheritance lies in the lessons we learn and the people we become.